Hello, my wonderful friends. Did you hear about the one about Finland and NATO and the two Russian guards at the border? Well, I'll tell you. You know that Europe is about to be invaded by Russia, right? So we're all in danger. They're going to invade. We don't know exactly when, but these things, it's difficult to ascertain this, with any amount of precision or anything. But they are, who knows? We don't know. Could be soon. Now, it seems that, the Russian bear woke up one day, stretched, and decided to have a good bite to eat for breakfast. And if you are hungry and you need to eat something right away, anything, you go for the nearest morsel you can find. And that morsel is Finland, which is right there, right? So at least the Finns think so. Finland is a sparsely populated country at the top of the world, a beautiful country with the Lappi people in the north. Used to be called Eskimos, but the same is in Alaska. But the Eskimos in Alaska, I don't know whether they have disappeared or, together with other North American tribes, or at least they're hardly ever seen, but not in Finland. They are there. It's a beautiful country. I used to have when I was young, I used to have a boyfriend from Finland, Timo. I wonder what happened to him. He was so blonde. He was almost albino or albino. I don't he was so transparent. Anyway. So it's a beautiful country. A little cold at times, you might say. Sometimes you might have to wear a cardigan every now and then. But the temperature is heating up. And not because of climate change. The temperature is heating up because the Russians are threatening Finland with an unprecedented military deployment. That is what we are told by the Finnish intelligence. And can this really be true? Can this be true? So let us examine, chronologically speaking, a little bit how this came to be. Okay, so a terrible threat to Finland that, needless to say, offends all of us, offends the consciences of all free, loving, good people. Now, you see, the entry of Finland into NATO marked a historic change. After their defeat by Russia in the Winter War, as in, around the World War II time, Finland at the time was on the side of the Germans, with concentration camps and filled with Russians. Look it up. Anyway, it was quite brutal, and it makes you wonder, is this for real? Is this true concentration camps with the Russians there and so on? The Finns? No. But yes, the Nordics are not always the belles of the ball, or at least not always the innocent, blushing maidens they appear to be. Anyway, the Finns were defeated by the Russians in this winter war, and they were actually kind of lucky because they could have suffered the same destiny as other Eastern countries, but and be, under the influence of the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union at the time decided to continue to be an independent nation, even though Finland had been part of the Russian Empire in the past. But nevertheless, they were allowed complete independence, but had to sign an agreement of neutrality, okay, which they did. And until now until they broke this agreement of neutrality a couple of years ago with their entry into NATO. The reasons, well, let's see. It used to be, we used to call to speak about the something called the Finlandization of a country. Remember, although the connotation of the word implied more than just being neutral, it conveyed a sense of having been neutered, something like that. So, in 2022, Finland decided not to be neutered anymore. So, and boy, did they show this. Everything was going well, as usual, the border. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, Finland continued doing its own thing, minding her own business, didn't get involved in any troubles. They had excellent relations with their Russian neighbors. Both peoples, as a matter of fact, would cross the borders freely, something to do at weekends, everyone did it. The Finns would go to the Finns would go to St. Petersburg, most beautiful city in Europe, I think. But not only for its beauty. I mean, they went there. There was the gasoline was much cheaper, and it was a non. They just went there to to fill up the tank, as it were. And the Russians too would cross the border and go to Finland, probably also to buy something that was cheaper there, whatever. They had no problems. There were, people going back and forth. And they were okay with each other. There is a border, yes, between Russia and Finland. The border is 1,430 kilometers long, but it was not a hostile border. Fine. But one fine day, with no provocation whatsoever, Moscow decided to invade Ukraine, you see. And so the Finns were absolutely terrified of this. They were terrified that they would be next in line in what undeniably was going to be an invasion spree. It has been said that in the 1930s a certain leader went around invading Europe, and that, among other things, it was because he was inspired. This is what some people say, that he was inspired by the music of Wagner. Well, I don't know. Perhaps Mr. Putin listens to Tchaikovsky and the Hymn of the Cherubim. No one knows. One never knows. In any case, the Finns reacted immediately, or so it seemed. Don't know how much of a say the Finnish people themselves had in all this, but their leader, Dancing Queen Sanna Marin, her of the nightclubs and posting pictures of women French kissing each other and so on. Anyway, that didn't go down very well with the Finns, but anyway, they joined NATO. As an aside, by the way, she went on to lose the next election, and I was wondering what she was doing now, so I found an article, and if you're interested, at the very end of this video, I'm going to tell you what she is doing now, Sanna Marin. In any case, anyway, to continue. This marked a change. This joining NATO marked a change in the Finnish security and neutrality that it had always maintained and kept since World War II without any problems. And now, under the leadership of this giddy, sort of empty-headed, scatterbrained young lady, Finland formally requests joining the Atlantic Alliance in 2022 in a process which could be called a sort of fast-track incorporation, given that Finland really was not host to any Kurds, as Sweden was. And so the country became a member of NATO very quickly on April 4th, 2023. The reason for this acceleration of the process was because of this Russian threat, because Russia's aggression towards the Ukraine, because of that, the population of Finland was absolutely terrified. Terror spread throughout the entire country because they have a border with the Russian Federation that extends for 1,340 kilometers. And after they joined, immediately one of the headlines in the press was that Finland, this was one of the headlines, Finland authorizes the United States of America to deploy soldiers and weapons in 15 military bases there in their territory. I think it's fair to say the most dangerous thing the Finns had seen in their border, actually, up to that point, safe border. The most dangerous thing that they had seen were probably two Russian border guards carrying a gun, whose job it was to stamp passports. But just in case these two stamping passports guards happened to want to cross the border wearing their, just in case they wanted to cross the border wearing their uniforms, not in civvies as they sometimes did, but, wearing their uniforms. Actually, I should really say mufti rather than civvies. You may not know this, but the British use mufti they use that word. It refers obviously to civilian attire, plain clothes, especially when worn by someone who normally wears a uniform. The word, you probably don't know this, but the word comes from the Arabic mufti, which means scholar, or perhaps student, or we could say now expert. That's why when most of our military retire and go to work for the military complex, they are then paraded on TV as experts. Mufti in dress and mufti in position. Anyway, in case these two Russian guards carrying a gun, stamping passports, decided to invade Finland by themselves, that's what happened. So Finland joined NATO because they needed to strengthen themselves against these two guards' invasion. And they said to themselves, where and what can we join for our defense? Something that is worthy of ourselves. So the Kremlin started saying, this is complicated. Why are you doing this? We are not aware of any problems. You never complain about two guards carrying a gun, stamping passports at the border. But let us continue. Joining the alliance, as you can imagine, meant a greater degree of control by NATO of all that area and surrounding areas, to the point that the Baltic Sea itself looks now like a sort of a mini lake, a little puddle there surrounded by NATO, with NATO ships coming and going all the time, but nevertheless, where once in a while, an uncontrolled person or two on a boat, unbeknownst to anyone there in any of the NATO posts, infiltrates the area, crosses and sneaks in through, let's say, an area and blows up Nord Stream. But that is not NATO's fault because they were not seeing, and in any case, they can do nothing about it. But you see, the sea, the Baltic Sea, the Russians really have no choice but to use it to get in and out of St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad. That's where they are. So it's not their fault that they are there, So the Russians' fault seems to be that they are there. Why do they have St. Petersburg right there in the Baltic Sea? They just so want to be in the middle of things, don't they, the Russians? It's like the Chinese. See my previous video on trade. I'll show it. I'll put it at the end of this video. Like the Chinese, encircled by American bases, the first chain, the second chain. It is their fault for being right there. They are the ones attacking. They are the ones attacking the American bases, encircling them. They are defending themselves. The same in Ukraine. To begin with, all the troops in the north along the Russian border, all those, I think there were about 29 labs, right, that the Russians found there along the border. People say they were CIA labs. Victoria Nuland herself actually testified before the Senate that they were intelligence laboratories there. But defensive ones, nothing to do with offensive bio labs, nothing like that. In case, I'm just telling you in case you're thinking terrible thoughts. No, right there along the Russian border. And she said that they were there, that she said so, when testifying before the Senate, and Senator Marco Rubio was asking the questions. They probably wanted to get it out because the Russians had found them, and now they were examining them, etc., etc. So they wanted to probably preempt damage control, as it were. And Senator Rubio was there to ask the right question at the right time. And some people foolishly said that Nuland's reply took him by surprise because she admitted to them being there. Surprise, I don't know, questions and answers in the Temple of Truth where goods and merchants are bought and sold. I just don't know whether they are, anything happens by, surprise. But anyway, I digressed. So, yes, the Russians are there in St. Petersburg, the most beautiful city in Europe, I think, or among them. And what can they do about it? Blow it up? Obviously not. So they are there, and they have to use now the Baltic, even though they are encircled. So anyway, now Finland is in NATO, and this, as you can imagine, will have quite an impact on Russia's security. But don't worry, that's not the point. The main point that you're missing is that what is important here is to guarantee the security and neutrality of Finland, which, by the way, had always had it since the Cold War. But they needed more security, just in case, and more neutrality, just in case, I suppose. So they did so by joining the alliance, NATO, a defensive alliance, which has never carried out any act of aggression unprovoked anywhere, but simply defend themselves. The result is that Finland strengthened NATO's position in the Russian northern flank and reinforced pressure on the Russian Arctic route and its access to the Atlantic. But it is the Russians' fault for being there in the first place when they shouldn't be. So now, In 2023, Finland and the US signed the Defense Cooperation Agreement, something that allows a foreign power, the US of North America, to install 15 military bases in Finnish territory. It never rains, but it pours. So, what could the US objective be? To threaten Russia? No. It was to face that threat, of the 2 border guards there carrying a gun, stamping passports. Hence, Finland, in fear of what those 2 border guards carrying a gun, stamping passports might do if they crossed the border and invaded Finland, the least the Finns could do was to put 15 military bases there by the border with St. Petersburg, where the US troops and probably more than a few Colombians and young men entering illegally through the southern border, and in other words, men to be sent to war or not by young men who, if they go missing, no one would ask. So anyway, training there as close to St. Petersburg as they can get, training to get used to the Arctic climate, and not only forces there, military, equipment, material, deployment of strategic weapons. We are seeing a country kind of changing a little bit. Yeah. So the Finnish foreign ministry explained it all. This agreement, they said, strengthens our country's defense by allowing the presence and training of US military forces in our territory. Now, Moscow kind of didn't share the joke. They kept talking about how doing this they felt that it was a serious threat to Russia, etc., etc. But of course, no one listened. And they continued complaining. Look, we believe that there is, the Russians were saying, we believe there is a question of proportionality here. You have 15 US military bases, okay? Japan has 80, I think. South Korea is about the same, or probably more. So 15 really is not that much, not to begin with. Anyway, so you have 15 military bases, you have strategic weapons, you have military training at the border, and all this as a response to 2 border guards carrying a gun, stamping passports. Surely, this is a question of proportionality. Surely you cannot say it is us, Russia, threatening you, the Finns. Well, surely anyone with a sense of fairness and a sense of right and wrong and a sense of what is truth and what is a lie can see that it is not really the Russians threatening Finland, but little Finland there, who sold herself, or her soul, to Nato for 15 pieces of silver, which is less than 30. Actually, no. Probably they let them have it. They let them have them gratis. Actually, no. They, the Finns themselves, actually have to pay for the privilege. What is it now? 5% or 3% of their GDP. Okay, so paying for the privilege of having intruders or invaders? No, because they accepted them. So guests, okay, on their soil. Now, if you want to be dramatic about it, you could say that is treason. Treason to the sovereignty of one's country, but only if you define it as a surrender to a foreign power, however friendly. Not that. That is what normally treason is, that you sell your country to a foreign invader. That is not the case here. It's a kind of a betrayal of another sort. Not so much of selling your country, you understand, but of buying its being taken over. What the Russians don't know is that the Americans, and this is a disease spreading at incredible speed among especially northern Protestant Europe. I say this because Russians are Orthodox, you see, and the Orthodox are more like Catholics, or how Catholics used to be. Don't get me started on the usurper Pope. Okay, but you know, sort of like the Catholics of the East, really. And but the Russians don't seem to know the difference, in that American religion is that if that is the proper word for a country founded by Freemasons, the country religion is basically Protestant Calvinism, which is a heresy of Christianity. See, they believe in pre-selection. And they believe, imagine, of them having been pre-selected, they call it saved, pre-selected by God. Imagine the heresy, because that is taking justice away from God. God just said, you and you and you and you, never gave any explanation. Some are saved and the rest of us are not. And the only way, they don't know who, but the only way they can prove that they have been pre-selected by God is by having success in the world, power and money. Okay, so they therefore usually have no qualms about eliminating by fair means and foul all those who they feel have not been pre-selected. And I'm talking not only about native tribes, but even the poor Quakers there, who were from the same tradition. But the Quakers sort of became pacifists, and they didn't want to be involved in eliminating others. And so they went after the Quakers too. Well, they actually left the Amish there as a sort of a souvenir, you know. Anyway, so Russia does not understand that she is up against a country run by chosen and elected, pre-selected. Nothing to do, they keep saying, nothing to do with fair or unfair, just or unjust, right or wrong. You're dealing with, in many cases, amoral people, spiritual invalids, really. But the Dancing Queen, PM, explained, and the Mufti experts explained, and the media explained, and everybody explained to the Finnish people that this was necessary, and that in the face of such a threat by Russia, of these two border guards there carrying a gun, stamping passports, the Finnish population would have no choice but, now that they had joined, increase now the purchase of weapons in the face of this horrid Russian threat. I insist that the two Russian border guards carrying a gun, stamping passports, were nevertheless in pretty good shape themselves. Went to the gym every day. Strong, good-looking fellows. Top shape, fit as a fiddle. Okay, all that, but really, could they have been a danger to Finnish security? So, we enter into the same thing that we see all the time, Russia's reaction. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesman, came out with some statements, about how there would be this would mean an increase in tensions between the two countries if that continue, blah blah blah. The Finns, frightened by these statements, went ahead and purchased yet more weapons from the US military industrial complex, who else, to reinforce their defense. Peskov continued saying that he deplored the deterioration of the good relations that the two countries had had up to that time. He said, we never had any complaints, so we don't quite understand. And dear Finland, dear neighbor, are you sure you want to continue along this path, playing this game? That was it. The agreement duly signed now in November 2024, you could say it was yesterday for all intents and purposes. NATO carried out its largest artillery integration exercise on European soil ever. It's called the Lightning Strike 24. It involved 5,000 US soldiers, 28 allied countries, and a few Colombians. And these exercises were carried out there, right at the Russian border, solely, it would seem, in order to demonstrate their defensive capacity or capability and make sure that they were seen by the two Russian border guards carrying a gun, stamping passports. But even that was not enough. After joining the alliance and all those artillery exercises at the border, Finland saw it necessary to put up a border wall with Russia. Yeah, a wall. 2,000 kilometers long border wall. 2,000 kilometers in the 1,340 kilometers, border. A wall, a barrier, a fence, it's 3 meters high, equipped with barbed wire, dark vision systems, speakers, lighting, designed to ensure control of cross-border movements. Border movements to mean Russia's invasion of Finland. The Finnish parliament approved it. Berlin had its wall, now the Finns have theirs. With a message to Moscow. Finland is taking drastic measures to protect its sovereignty and its territorial integrity from the two border guards carrying a gun, stamping passports. The cost is 380 million euros. The wall, besides its physical importance, has also a symbolic impact. A clear representation of how Finland is integrated now wholly into the Western Bloc. And this thought crossed some people's minds. Is this not a little bit of too much of an escalation? No, of course not. It was not really. It was a defensive move. Now there's a report from the Finnish intelligence that tells us that Russia intends to strengthen their military the military district of St. Petersburg. Why on earth would Russia take such a drastic step? Finnish intelligence reports say that the Russians are going to form an army corps in Karelia, Karelia is a geographical place. It's divided into Russia and Finland. And with several brigades there, turned into divisions. For those of you who are not up to scratch with these military distinctions, one division, I looked it up, one division equals more or less 3 or 4 brigades. And one brigade equals between 10 and 15,000 soldiers. So altogether, they're saying that they are building a 30,000 soldiers military presence there. That's only the beginning, they say. They continued, but this will probably increase from about 30,000 to 80,000 soldiers. And they continue, when the Ukraine war is over, it will probably increase again to 1.5 million. However, while the war with Ukraine is still going on, the figures will not really increase dramatically, they added. But as soon as that war is over, they'll concentrate on the north, that is us, the Finns. Not right now, because Russian garrisons on the border with Finland have been depleted. There is no one there because both equipment and soldiers were needed for Russia when they attacked Ukraine. So they've all gone when they attacked Ukraine in February 2022. So they're all gone, which means that for the time being, a Russian attack is unlikely. And that is what they said. And the Finnish director of the Foreign Policy Institute programs, Hans Nikola, who is an expert on the on the Arctic region, assesses that the next border conflict will extend to the territory of Finland. But wasn't it the case that Russian threat was imminent right now? Well, don't be facetious. In any case, the Republic of Karelia, they are working on that, and an army that will be part of the 44th Army Corps. Okay, so if you are lost, here is the translation. There were 2 border guards carrying a gun, stamping passports to begin with. One of them had to be sent, you see, to the war with Ukraine, because they didn't have enough soldiers, lack of soldiers and all that, which means that the Russian threat at the border is now one border guard carrying a gun who used to be there stamping passports. The other one was sent to fight in Ukraine for lack of soldiers. And this one man constitutes a threat. Who knows, perhaps perhaps he got up in the morning, stretched, and after stretching and working out, who knows, perhaps he himself was listening to Tchaikovsky too and the hymn of the cherubim, and he might invade Finland. So, according to the Finnish military intelligence, debatable if these 3 words can go together, Russia's objective is to increase the size of the armed forces from 30,000 they're trying to do now, if they can bring all those, sentry people in sentry boxes, but the barracks together, to increase that size to 350,000 soldiers to eventually reach 1.5 million. Well, after you establish 15 foreign military bases without motive, not for you yourself as a country, to join NATO. And you bring nuclear strategic weapons and do military artillery maneuvers there on the border. The biggest, largest maneuvers carried out on European soil ever. That's how they were defined. And all of it right there on the noses of 2 Russian border guards carrying a gun, stamping passports. Well, actually just one now, because the other one had to go to Ukraine to fight the Ukrainians. Okay, so what do you expect? That's my question. Now, for those of you who are interested enough to know about what happened to the Prime Minister Sarah Marin, this is an article. She's a little bit of a rock star, the rock star of the globalists. The one from New Zealand, what was her name? I forget. I don't know where she is, probably in the same place. But anyway, here's the article from Elle magazine. Sanna Marin is still dancing. The former Prime Minister of Finland changed the image of who a politician can be. One day last fall, this is from a year ago, January 24, one day last fall, attendees inside the lecture hall at the University of California, Los Angeles, sat eagerly awaiting the arrival of Sanna Marin, the former Prime Minister of Finland, who became the world's youngest premier, male or female, when she took office in 2019 at the age of 34. Tickets sold out in 2 hours. There was an overflow room and a Zoom link for those who weren't lucky enough to snag spot. It was like getting tickets to see the Rolling Stones, says Leslie Jones, professor of political science and law and associate director of UCLA's Berkeley Center for International Relations, which sponsored the lecture. The crowd was especially excited to hear Marin speak about how she led her country to join NATO in the wake of Russia's war in Ukraine. How many people do that in their lifetime, let alone their mid-30s, Jones says, marveling. It's true, Sanna Marin is about the closest thing global politics has to a rock star. She's worn leather jackets to meet with fellow world leaders and has 1 million followers on Instagram, where her feed features snaps of her posing with celebrities and partying with friends at music festivals. In her nearly 4 years as Prime Minister, she was praised for her deft handling of COVID, climate change and the war. Yet, despite her accomplishments, outside of poli-sci circles, Marin is known mostly for her dance moves, following the leak of a video in August 2022 that showed her and her friends dancing at a private party. In reporting this article over the past several months, I've told people here and there about what I'm working on, and everyone from friends to Uber drivers to the jewelry security guards on set at the photo shoot for this story said something, all of them said something to the effect, "Oh, yeah, the partying Prime Minister." Partying from party, not from the verb to part. Okay, so there's more. At first I thought it was a tragedy that this history-making politician was best known for the sexism-laced scandals she weathered over how she dressed and socialized. But then I watched how Marine carried on after each headline-making turn. She was still living her life like a normal 30-something woman, uncensored and unashamed. It's probably the trouble. Before long, I realized that in refusing to be anything other than exactly who she is, while continuing to do her job with aplomb, Marine was in effect proving to the world and all of its women that there is room for them in the political arena too. And that's not a bad thing to be known for at all. This is why I didn't want to change myself, Marine tells me on the rooftop of the Waldorf Astoria Beverly Hills, where she is staying. I wanted to show the younger generation, especially young women, that you can be yourself. You don't have to become something else. You don't have to be an older man. We need diversity. We don't need more gray-suited people. This is the extent of her wisdom, I guess. All right. So we had arranged to meet a few hours before the event at UCLA. While I wait for Marine to arrive, her former chief of staff tells me they'd had a meeting at Netflix that morning. They are in Los Angeles for just a few days, Marine's first time in LA, and the schedule is packed. The following night, I see photos of Maria posing with Sharon Stone at the Finnish ambassador's residence. Okay, so she still can use the Finnish ambassador's residence. Okay. Oh, probably as a guest. Okay. So it's early October, roughly a month since Marine embarked on a new chapter for herself. This past April, the coalition government she led narrowly failed to win enough seats to maintain its majority. Marine's party increased its number of seats, but other parties in the coalition lost more than hers gained. So in June, Marine left the Prime Minister's office and 3 months later surprised the world by announcing she was stepping down as party leader and leaving Parliament, effectively retiring from Finnish politics at the age of 37. Quote, after being Prime Minister, you want new challenges, she tells me. I served as parliamentarian before, and I need new challenges ahead of me. I'm really excited about it. We will see what the future will bring. An air of possibilities surrounds her now. An air of possibilities around her now. The world has never had a former female prime minister this young. Marine arrives by herself, no security, wearing a monochrome cream look. Slacks, a silky spaghetti strap tank, and a headband with an Apple Watch, simple gold jewelry, and red lipstick. We discuss our coffee orders. Marine tells me Finns drink more coffee than anyone in the world, joking that she herself drinks about 15 cups a day. She does have the energy of a well-caffeinated person, although her demeanor is serious and intensely dedicated. None of my attempts at humor land. She tells me she was born in Helsinki, but moved as a child to Pirkkala, a community of 20,000 plus, outside of Tampere, one of Finland's largest cities. Her mom and dad split up when she was an infant. She lived with her mom and her partner, her mom's partner, another woman, who helped raise her. Marine calls them a rainbow family. and says that in the 90s no one talked about how she had had two moms. There was silence on the matter. But when she told her family's story as an adult, she heard from people who reached out to me and said that they were also raised in a rainbow family in the same town, she says. But like me, they always thought they were the only ones. Her mother and her partner split up when Maureen was in high school. Her mother was raised in an orphanage and started working when she was 15. She had Sana when she was 23 and before long became a single mother. We were, by Nordic standards, poor, Maureen says. It shaped my way of thinking, how I see people, how I see the structures in our society. I would suggest to this young woman that she goes to Gaza for a month and stays there and tries to get a crumb of bread or a drop of water from time to time. Maureen was the first in her family to go to both high school and university, a beneficiary of Finnish welfare and its public education system, which is free from daycare through college. Don't know whether they'll be able to keep it up now that they have to pay 5% of their GDP, but in any case, she got her first taste of politics at the University of Tampere, where she completed her bachelor's and received her master's in administration science. They call it the science, administration. She served as a representative in the student government and tells me about a time when the students were opposed to the way the administration was choosing a new chancellor. Out of about 150 people in the room, she was the only one who had the guts to say what everyone was thinking. Everybody was like, "Can you say this out loud?" Maureen says. I wasn't ever afraid of taking a stand. I say what I think, and I really mean what I say, even if that way of thinking isn't always the most popular or feels too radical at the time. I say it sounds like she has a lot of confidence. Or maybe I'm stupidly brave, she says, before adding, but it was noticed. Maureen also joined the youth wing of the Social Democratic Party when she was at college and began campaigning for causes she believed in: climate neutrality, parental leave, education reform. Less than 2 decades later, as Prime Minister, she had the satisfaction of enacting policies on the issues she had first championed as a student. It was really fulfilling, she says. I can understand that people feel very frustrated that politics is so slow, but if you work on it, it will happen. She draws a comparison with her own life. When she was elected Prime Minister, it might have looked like it happened overnight, but I've been in politics for almost 20 years. Her now ex-husband, Markus Räikkönen, a former soccer player turned venture capital investor, who began dating Maureen when they were both 18, remembers thinking by the time they were in their mid-20s that Sana was a natural, just very talented from an early age. Even after she lost her first election, she ran for Tampere City Council at the age of 23 and got only 160 votes. But he thought this will work out eventually. He drove with her all over, watching her give speeches and connect with locals and shine in televised debates. There were pretty experienced older men going against her, and the end result was always the same. She beat them, Räikkönen tells me. And everybody was like, whoa, who is this person? She rose to head of the city council and in 2015 was elected to parliament. In December 2019, the Finnish Prime Minister at the time, Antti Rinne, resigned over disagreements about his handling of a labour dispute. As first deputy chair of the party, Marine had to step up. I remember my closest friends and allies were in my apartment when I was named Prime Minister, and I said to them, "Do I really have to do this now?" She says. I was terrified and at the same time thinking, I will do this, let's do this. The instant and intense global attention she received as the world's youngest prime minister took her by surprise. I didn't anticipate it, she says. And actually, I would have taken some pictures off Instagram if I'd realized the press interest beforehand. She says she mainly would have removed baby photos of her daughter, Emma, who was born in 2018. The excitement was magnified by the fact that the 4 other party leaders who made up the 5-party coalition government that propelled Marine into the Prime Minister's office were also women. 4 of the 5 were under the age of 35. 12 of the 19 ministers in her cabinet were women, too. It was a coup, even in a country known for its gender equality. She took office in December 2019, and we all know what was right around the corner. Straight away, we went from normal to pandemic, Marine says. She worked 7 days a week, beginning around 6 a.m. and wrapping around 2 a.m. It felt like a week's work was handled in one day, and in a week it was a month's work, she says. Marine says her calm nature and decisiveness served her well. We were all women, you see, and we thought, okay, we will make decisions because we have to. And if they are the wrong ones, we will change them later. So it's not an issue of pride or anything, she explains. That was our strategy, to learn along the way. Emma's daycare was closed and Raikkonen stayed home with her, working remotely, with Marine's mom pitching in. Marine held press conferences every day, telling the public what was happening and the decisions the government was making. Finland emerged with one of the lowest infection rates in Europe, as well as comparatively less economic stress. Then, as the world was just starting to return to normal, in early 2022, war came to her backyard. Okay. She remembers going to sleep knowing she would likely awake to full-scale conflict. I woke up quite early and got the message. Russia has attacked Ukraine. The war is a reality. Finland shares the longest border with Russia of any EU nation and has been invaded before. The Finnish government sent weapons to Ukraine right away and joined sanction negotiations with the US and the UK. Up until that point, Finland had prided itself on its independence. But virtually overnight, Finns realized we have to enter NATO because that's the only line Russia won't cross. Marine explains. She helped lead her country to join the alliance. It was the fastest accession in NATO's 74-year modern history. I felt it was the biggest thing we could do to ensure peace in the future, she says. It was to ensure it was to ensure there will never again be war on Finnish soil. She visited Ukraine twice after the war began, seeing mass graves in Bucha and wounded soldiers in hospitals. We have to be very tough and solid and brave and strong in our support, she says now. It is so important to make sure that Ukraine will win the war and Russia will lose. This is not only a matter of Ukraine or of Europe, it is a matter of the whole democratic world. If authoritarian regimes think they can act like this, that they can invade other country, then nobody is safe. Doubling down with her trademark directness, she adds, I don't personally believe there should be some face-saving solution for Putin. I think we should get rid of Putin, says the masters in administrative science. Through the pandemic and the war, Marine leaned on her fellow party leaders. Of course, we have very tough negotiations. Politics are still politics, but as women, we also supported each other, she says. After the negotiations, we shared stories about balancing family and working life. 3 of the 5 leaders had babies and took parental leave during the coalition's 4 years in power. Lee Anderson, who heads the Left Alliance Party and was part of the coalition, tells me that after hours the leaders sometimes gathered at the Prime Minister's residence to visit the sauna in the yard or listen to playlists Marine had made. In those moments, you're just a 30-something woman talking about your kids and putting on your favorite music, Anderson says. Of course, the dancing elephant in the room is that at the same time that Marine was dealing with COVID and war, she was battling personal blows in the media. Her first brush with the tabloids came less than a year after she took office as Prime Minister. Marine had agreed to pose for a Finnish magazine photo shoot as part of a profile. She gave them 15 minutes. When she walked in, they handed her a suit and some jewelry. She put it on, flashed a smile, and went on with her day. But when the image was published in October 2020, critics were scandalized by her wearing a blazer with no shirt underneath. How could she? Marine says, describing the media tenor. It's all related to the fact that we, as a society, still think that it is our right and actually our obligation to decide how women should act, behave, and look. Women around the world posted selfies of themselves in blazers with the hashtag I'm with Sana in the aftermath. There is always this moral gaze. Did she behave correctly? How can she dance like that? Tabloids first latched onto the party girl narrative in December 2021, when Marine stayed out with her husband celebrating Independence Day until 4 a.m. and missed a text message instructing her to isolate due to a possible COVID exposure. And then came the dance video in August 2022. If Marine knows who was behind the leak, she doesn't tell me, but she says she doesn't think it was anyone close to her. Though she is unapologetic about her behavior, the leak took a toll.
It felt like such an invasion, an intrusion of my privacy and life, she says. It was hard, it was violating, and I felt it as a personal attack. So it was real emotional. Especially since it came from a rare moment when she could unwind. I'm always working, and I have 2 weeks of summer vacation per year. Of course, I'm not drinking when I am at work. I am doing my job, and it's heavy, and I need to be focused. So when I have a small summer vacation and can see my friends and have a few drinks, I dance. It doesn't hurt anybody. But for women in politics, even minor missteps can lead to a frenzy, wouldn't you know? Women are seen as the ones who are supposed to come into office and be exemplary. They're supposed to be the ones who never falter, just work and keep their heads down, says Debbie Walsh, director of the Center for American Women and Politics. But the problem with that is when you are held to that kind of standard, you have much further to fall. There is an underlying strategy behind the disproportionate scrutiny women politicians face, she argues. It's about scaring women. It's about keeping them out. It's about silencing their voices. It says to other women, don't do this. Don't put yourself through this. It's pretty straightforward and simple, and it can absolutely have a chilling effect. If you've never seen the video in question, you might be envisioning something far more sensational than it is. It looks like any gathering you might have with your friends, which might be why so many women, including Hillary Clinton and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, had her back, posting photos and videos of themselves dancing. Marine is unapologetic and sees the coverage for what it is. So many of these media frenzies that I have been in the middle of, there is always this moral gaze. Did she behave correctly? How can she dance like that? She says. There is the moral gaze of everything that a woman does, whether it is how you raise your child, how you do your work, how you live our personal life, or what you wear. True to form, she says the quiet part out loud. This is something that nobody wants to say. The problem wasn't my dancing. We have seen other politicians dance and sing and drink. The real problem was that I looked too sexy. It's the way I danced, the way I performed. I looked the wrong way. I was too young. I dressed differently than people assumed. I moved in a way somebody thinks is incorrect. But she also wants to be clear. All those scandals didn't even reach the top 50 of things I think of when I think of the past 4 years. Her work, then as now, remains her focus as she navigates like an ex-prime minister. In early September, she joined, the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change as a strategic counselor to advise world leaders on policy. Later that month, she signed on with Range Media Partners, an entertainment and talent management company. She's navigating co-parenting with Raikkonen. They filed for divorce in May 2023, but remain close. She seems to be enjoying the freedom that comes with being a former politician. Well, they do get paid, don't they? I am not prime minister anymore, but I'm still partying, she says with a laugh. In late September, Marine attended her first Paris Fashion Week, sitting front row at Victoria Beckham. In November, she jetted off to Germany to give a series of speeches and then to Seville, Spain, where she celebrated her 38th birthday in a scarlet dress. Less than a month before Marine retired from Finnish politics, she attended a summer music festival. She posted a series of photos on her Instagram grid from the event, laughing with friends while wearing a hot pink dress and thigh-high boots in one frame and posing in a leather miniskirt, a crop top, a chunky heels in another. The tabloids picked it up, exclaiming that she was having a hot girl summer. Marine was seemingly unfazed. She's determined that through her, people see that women can be all things. At the same time that we are mothers and decision makers, we are having fun with our friends. We are playful. We are all these different things at the same time, she says, and we don't have to diminish ourselves at all. We don't have to diminish ourselves at all. I think women deserve everything. They should have everything, like men have always had. This is the brain behind Finland joining NATO. So, I hope you enjoyed it. I leave it there. There is hardly anything else to say. Goodbye.